Hello, students. So, we continue with the summary of Biographia Literaria by Coleridge, and we saw how Wordsworth was able to lend a charm of novelty to the familiar objects around so that the readers might look at the beauty of the familiar with wonder and admiration. The intellectual energy and genius of the poet is displayed in the poems was such that even his critics and scoffers were impressed by it. Their many merits, together with the violent aversion created by his critical opinions, produced a ferment which kept the poems alive in public memory. Coleridge says that he himself did not agree with many parts of Wordsworth's preface and made bold to point out that they were wrong in principle and contradictory not only to other parts of the preface but also to the practice of the poet himself in most of the poems. As his own name has been frequently mentioned by the critics, along with that of Wordsworth as the co writer of the preface, he deems it proper to declare in which parts he agrees with Wordsworth and in which parts he does not do so. But in order to facilitate an understanding of his views, he must explain his views first of a poem and secondly of poetry in general. So, what are his views on poem? A poem contains the same elements as a prose composition, the difference between them being either in different combination of those elements or a different object which the poet has in mind. The object of the poet may simply be to aid the memory, to remember certain facts and experience, and in consequence, the resultant poem may differ from a prose composition only in the use of meter or rhyme, which are aids to memory. In the use of meter, the source of pleasure consists in the anticipation of the recurrence of particular sounds. In scientific and historical compositions, the immediate object is the conveyance of truth and the imparting of pleasure, if any, is only secondary or incidental. In prose works of other kinds, the communication of pleasure may be the immediate purpose, though truth, moral or intellectual, ought to be their ultimate end. But communication of pleasure is the immediate object of certain varieties of prose compositions, also, such as novels and romances. Now, the question arises, if mere super addition of meter to such compositions can change them into poems. To this, Coleridge replies that if meter is superadded, the other parts of the composition also must harmonize with it. The recurrence of accent and sound, which is the essence of meter, directs attention to each part of the composition separately. And in order to deserve the name of a poem, each part must be so arranged as to justify that attention. A poem, therefore, may be defined as a class of composition which is opposed to works of science in proposing for its immediate object pleasure, not truth. It is distinguished from prose compositions whose immediate purpose is to give pleasure in the important respect that the proposed delight to be yielded by the whole is in consonance with the pleasure which each part is distinctly calculated to provide. It means the poem is an organic whole in which the various parts work in harmony to provide that pleasure which is peculiar to poetry. Philosophical critics of all ages and countries are one in denying the name of a poem to such metrical compositions where single lines are so striking that they can be detached from the whole and enjoyed separately, or where the parts are so undistinguished that the reader can rapidly glance through the whole and understand its general purport without paying attention to and enjoying the beauty of the separate parts.